You've been lied to. They keep telling you that the US dollar is eternal, that it's the bedrock of the entire global economy, and nothing can shake it. But what if the next fatal financial crisis doesn't start in New York or London? What if it begins on a tiny island you can barely see on a map? This is the story of how one small nation is quietly building the blueprint for a world where the dollar is doomed. For 70 years, the US dollar has been the king. It's what you use to buy oil, what nations hold in their banks, and what the world trusts. But all empires crumble. And while the major powers argue over politics, this small, insignificant spot on the map has already figured out the exit plan. They built a super wealthy life raft, and the richest people in the world are already climbing aboard. Let's be honest, the dollar's reign is not a birthright. It's a historical accident. It all goes back to 1944, a meeting in a place called Bretton Woods. The world was broken by war. The U.S. was the only country left standing with a strong economy and a mountain of gold. So, all the world's major nations agreed. Every other currency would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar would be tied to gold. Then, in 1971, President Nixon made a move that was fatal for the old system. He cut the dollar's link to gold completely. From that moment on, the US dollar's value was backed by nothing but faith and the agreement that you had to use it to buy oil, that as the petrodollar system. And for decades, this system has given the U.S. an insane advantage. They can print money whenever they want. They can run up a huge national debt without collapsing because the world needs their money. This is the urgent problem right now. The world is tired of this dominance. When the U.S. government slaps sanctions on a country, they're basically saying, your money is worthless now. This weaponization of the dollar has pushed major economies, especially China and Russia, to find an alternative. They are looking for a financial escape route, and they are finding it in the most unlikely of places. This is where the story of this small nation becomes a massive threat to the dollar. It's a country called Singapore. Think about Singapore in the early 1960s. It was a miserable place. It was tiny. It had no land, no water, no oil, and no army. When it was kicked out of Malaysia in 1965, its future seemed doomed. The first prime minister, a man named Lee Kuan Yew, famously wept on television. His dream of a unified nation had collapsed. He had to build a country from scratch, and he had to do it faster and better than anyone else, or Singapore would simply fade away. This desperate start led to a singular, compelling thesis. Singapore would become necessary. It wouldn't try to compete with the U.S. or China on size or resources. It would compete on competence, stability, and sheer financial utility. And this is the historical context that you absolutely need to understand. Lee Kuan Yew looked at the surrounding region, Southeast Asia, and saw corruption, instability, and political chaos. He decided Singapore would be the opposite. This was the first and most important step on the path to becoming incredibly rich. Lee Kuan Yew had a list of fatal problems right at the beginning. No resources, high unemployment, and a divided population. His solution was pure, ruthless pragmatism. He wasn't focused on democracy or popularity. He was focused on survival and wealth creation. His core belief was simple. A functional economy is the only thing that keeps a small nation from being wiped out. The first thing they did was wipe out corruption. Most developing nations are paralyzed by it, where officials demand bribes just to get a license. Lee Kuan Yew's government made the decision that corruption was a fatal economic disease. They paid their government officials and judges exceptionally high salaries, some of the highest in the world, and then enforced anti-corruption laws with brutal efficiency. The message was clear. If you are clean, you are rich and respected. If you are dirty, your career is over, and you will face public humiliation and jail time. This created a level of trust and stability that no one else in the region could match. Imagine you are a giant American or European corporation in the 1970s, looking to build a factory in Asia. You could go to one place where you have to pay 10 different bribes just to pour concrete, or you could go to Singapore, where the rules are clear, the contracts are honored, and the government works with speed and efficiency. The choice was obvious. This immediately made Singapore a magnet for foreign direct investment, the kind of money that builds real, long-term wealth. Since they couldn't produce raw materials, they decided to manage the flow of everyone else's. Singapore is perfectly located along the busiest shipping lanes in the world, right near the Straits of Malacca. They didn't just build a port, they built the best port. They invested relentlessly in technology, logistics, and infrastructure. They became the world's hub for shipping, refining, and trade. If you buy something made in China and sold in Europe, there's a good chance it passed through Singapore. They took a tiny, efficient cut of the world's massive trade flows. This wasn't about selling their own products. It was about being the essential toll booth for global commerce. It's like owning the busiest intersection in the world and charging every car a small fee to pass through. This created a steady, reliable stream of income, totally independent of the dollar's day-to-day fluctuations. The original video you watched mentioned this pivot, but let's go deeper into the sheer scale of the vision. Lee Kuan Yew always saw manufacturing as a stepping stone. The real, high-value, high-profit game was always going to be finance. In the 1980s and 90s, the UK dominated global finance, but Singapore saw a massive, unfulfilled opportunity, the rise of Asia's wealth. As countries like Japan, South Korea, and then later China and India exploded in economic growth, their newly rich needed a stable, trustworthy place to put their money, a safe haven. They certainly weren't going to trust their own government's volatile banking systems. And while Switzerland was a safe bet for the old money of Europe, Singapore was geographically and culturally accessible to the new money of Asia. The Singapore government went to work, purposefully designing a financial system to attract this wealth. Low taxes. Corporate tax rates were slashed to be internationally competitive, making it a no-brainer for a global company to set up its regional headquarters there. They essentially said, keep your money here, and we'll take a minimal cut, but in exchange, you get perfect stability and infrastructure. Light regulation. They liberalized financial services, making it easy for the big banks, Goldman Sachs, UBS, Credit Suisse to open up shop. They made sure the rules were clear and reliable, which is what big money craves. This pivot wasn't slow. It was an urgent, deliberate shift into the high-stakes world of asset management. The land reclamation strategy, a descriptive aside. To truly grasp the scale of their ambition, consider the land. Singapore is about 730 square kilometers. That's smaller than New York City. But over the last few decades, they have added about 25% more land by dumping sand and earth into the sea. They literally created new land to build their financial district, their airport, and their world-class housing. Imagine the sheer will and engineering power required for this. It's the ultimate statement of confidence. We are so convinced of our future wealth that we are creating physical space for it to grow. This constant development and reinvention is why the country never rests. It's a non-stop, urgent race to the future. If they ever slow down, they know they are doomed to irrelevance. The destination strategy, then came the final, most audacious move under Lee Kuan Yew's son, Lee Hsien Loong. To keep all that foreign talent and money from leaving, Singapore had to be more than just a clean office park. It had to be a desirable place to live. A place that felt special, exciting, and modern. They brought in the Formula One night race. They built iconic structures like the Marina Bay Sands Resort and the Gardens by the Bay. Most controversially, they legalized casinos and built massive integrated resorts. They took a huge, high-risk gamble on entertainment. Why? Because a billionaire from Jakarta or Beijing who is banking their money in Singapore might also want to fly in on the weekend, gamble, stay in a 5-star hotel, and go shopping. This keeps the money circulating inside the country, funding new infrastructure and creating jobs. It was a strategy of making the country an endpoint, not just a stopover. This entire sequence of calculated moves from anti-corruption to port efficiency to global finance to luxury tourism created a synergy that led to a colossal explosion of wealth. By 2022, the total assets under management in Singapore had reached $3.6 trillion. That number is a fatal statistic for the US dollar's global monopoly. That's $3.6 trillion, or the equivalent, that has been entrusted to a country that is not beholden to Washington, D.C. The US dollar is backed by the US military and the faith of global institutions. But faith is a fragile thing. When nations around the world saw the U.S. government freeze the assets of certain central banks, the alarm bells went off. It sent an urgent signal. If you hold your wealth in U.S. dollar assets, the U.S. government can take it away. This is the turning point, the climax of the story. The world's money started looking for a neutral harbor, and Singapore, the tiny island state, was ready. When the U.S., the U.K., and Europe started aggressively sanctioning Russia, Russian oligarchs and businesses needed a place where their wealth would be safe from Western legal reach. Singapore became an attractive option. When the Chinese government began cracking down on its own tech billionaires and private wealth, those individuals needed a place that was Chinese-friendly but legally independent. They needed a place that spoke Mandarin, understood Asian business culture, but had the rule of law of a Western-style nation. Singapore was the only option. The most urgent movement of money today isn't happening between countries. It's happening out of countries and into safe havens. High net worth individuals, who are often the first to see a coming crisis, have poured their money into Singapore's private banks. They buy property in Singapore because they trust the legal system will protect their ownership. They incorporate businesses there because they know the taxes will be low and the bureaucracy will be fast. This mass migration of wealth is effectively a vote of no confidence in the old system. The dollar's power is slowly being undercut, not by a rival superpower, but by a small, ultra-efficient financial hub. Singapore is the ultimate middleman, a neutral space that profits from the geopolitical instability of everyone else. It is the ultimate insurance policy against the collapse of the dollar-centric world. The wealth of this small nation isn't just a feel-good story of hard work. It's a massive, looming sign that the financial landscape has changed forever. It proves that you don't need a massive landmass, a huge population, or a world-beating military to become the world's bank. You just need stability, certainty, and an escape route for those who fear a fatal mistake from the old guard. Every single $1 trillion parked in Singapore is one less $1 trillion that needs to be held or transacted in US dollars. Every major trade deal done through Singapore's financial system is a small crack in the foundation of the petrodollar. The doom of the old system is being quietly financed on this tiny island. The old world order is crumbling, not with a bang, but with the quiet, efficient transfer of wealth from unstable centers to the stable, super-rich little island that saw the financial crisis coming decades ago. So, what is the core lesson here? It's not about Singapore's architecture or its low crime rate. It's about the strategic decision made by a desperate leader in the 1960s to create a nation so unique, so competent, and so indispensable that the world's wealth had to flow there. They started with nothing, faced a fatal outlook, and built a $3.6 trillion financial fortress based on a single idea: absolute trust. While the U.S. dollar system is slowly being corroded by inflation, debt, and political weaponization, Singapore offers a concrete, functioning blueprint for the post-dollar world. They proved that stability and smart policy can be a far more valuable commodity than oil, gold, or even military power. The wealth of Singapore is a permanent monument to the failure of the old global financial system to serve the new global rich. And every day, more and more money moves, making the dollar's eventual decline less a matter of it and more a matter of when. This little country is already living in the future, a future where they are the winners, and the dollar's monopoly is a relic of the past. If you want to know which nation will be the next to break away, make sure you subscribe.